Okay, we are live. Maybe let's start with Nathan today and then go up from there.
Yeah, this is what I get for being excited about math. I'm excited about math, but it's been like a decade plus since I was in grad school, so much of this has faded from my memory. But it is really cool. Like I don't know, reading through this, especially. I don't know, like even the last time we were doing this and we were starting to talk a little bit about the zero knowledge stuff, and that I did a session, a little workshop on that a couple of years ago at a hacker conference, and thought it was really, really fascinating then, and just continue to be. And I think one of the things that struck me with this is I hadn't realized quite how deeply um, the work on zero knowledge systems um, had and zero knowledge cryptography, it was sort of permeating Ethereum even at this point. I thought it was kind of a future thing, but like so much of this stuff, even the Verkle tree stuff, is premised on either using these sorts of techniques or building towards those sorts of techniques. And it makes me wish that I was 15 years younger and just starting grad school, and my life may have taken a completely different course because, like, this is just all so cool. Um, I think we talked about like overall, we've been all running this through various LLMs. Um, I'm not super familiar with the other roadmaps, so I'm just kind of trusting the LLMs here. Uh, Maybe my first mistake, but like it does feel like Ethereum is probably actually the most ambitious of all of the blockchains at this point, but also it is a little risky. Like they've already had a lot of delays, and you know that 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 does some damage to reputation, creates some social and reputational damage. But like where they're aiming seems to be so far out ahead of everyone else, and especially again incorporating a lot of the zero knowledge where cryptography in could be really cool. Um, I am a little surprised that they are still moving forward with vertical trees. It feels like um, the quantum computer stuff has been starting to move at a faster and faster clip. And yeah, we're still many years away from even three-letter agencies having desktop quantum computers that are usable for cracking this stuff. But it's starting to feel a lot closer than it did even 18 months ago. And given that vertical trees are not quantum safe, I would like I don't know, my naive thing at this point would be like unless it was like on the verge of being implemented, maybe it is. I don't know. Like my inclination would be like this doesn't seem like it seems like potentially spending a lot of effort for something that's going to have to be rolled back maybe sooner than expected. So I think that was kind of my biggest concern reading through that. So those are my sort of general thoughts. I think Venkat is right. This is a lot, but I don't know. I just keep saying this is so cool. But we were passing up, I think. So Ben probably has more complete thoughts than I do.
That might be the case if I hadn't just woken up and hadn't had my coffee yet. It might be wise for you to circle back around to me, but I don't know. I don't like single slot finality. I think pre-comps are the way to go. Maybe perhaps I'll explain more of that later. Uh, what else are looking at through this list? I mean, I'm not too worried about quantum computers myself. I think they're overhyped. I think that the technical problems are harder and maybe we'll eventually get there. But I'm not worried about being anything broken by them, like in 30 years. Maybe maybe I'm too pessimistic, and maybe in 25 years things will be broken. But I don't know. Like vertical trees. I mean, I certainly like Merkle trees and their various descendants, so that's good. Yeah, here, you can come back around to me. I'll pass up to Anraj.
Yeah, so the initial thought was like this is really a detailed plan, and then like with the pace of the R&D at Ethereum, is it like a 25-year or 20-year plan? And even if it's not faster, then some of the tech might go like the roadmap might change a lot if it's not built fast enough, and then new theories or technologies might come around, and some of these might become obsolete. So that was like initial thought I had, like, but it's really detailed, and I tried searching what other blockchains are doing, but they are doing like far less R&D, I think, than compared to what it's happening on the Ethereum. And like as Nathan is excited, like I'm too excited, but and if I had like a fuck you money, then I would do this like full time and this plus robotics. But like I have to go to a job, so I don't get to study this full time. But like yeah, really excited. And a lot of the stuff I'm really interested is coming in the Verge and with the RISC-V based EVM and ZK and together with robotics, like maybe in like the next 2, 3, 4 years might come around. So that is what I am excited about. And yeah, for the search, I think it's like went through the search part, and so the blob is already live, and they are trying to increase the blob space, I think, to, and I think 60% of the validators. So I heard somewhere they were signaling it. I didn't understand what that data availability sampling is, but yeah, I would like to read more about that. Yeah, those were some initial thoughts. Passing on to Anand.
Uh, yeah, yeah. I guess I share some of the same spirits that Ethan and Anurag shared. This stuff is very interesting, and I just had more time to do this. But I'll share some of the highlights that as I was watching the video. I wrote down like one thing that struck me is the sort of fraud proofs and the state of development of the fraud proofs and how decentralized those are. Like if the roadmap is entirely based on L2 scaling and you really depend on like a thriving ecosystem of L2s that are interoperable with each other. That becomes important. But I think on L2 Beat, I looked it up that base is at the highest in terms of the economic security that it's providing for, but the state of the uh, decentralizing the sequencer is still unknown to me, and I'm kind of interested to look at that. The other thing that, the same spirit, the other thing that occurred to me while reading through the roadmap, or at least hearing the summary from Timothy, was that this seems to me as like the most like blockchains in general seems like a compression for compute in some sense. Like. Uh, in the long term, like if the roadmap is fully sort of built out, then we would have like this global decentralized compute infrastructure that's as as censorship resistant and as decentralized as it can be, and also as environmentally sustainable as well, like with data availability sampling and the sort of Merkle trees that's coming up. It seems like all the great compression stuff to do more interesting types of compute is on the horizon. That is very, very exciting to me. The other thing that occurred to me while reading through this, like how much of this uh, gets distracted by like side quests that one has to go to as a result of some emerging ecosystem level problems. That thing did, like quantum computers are obviously like one of those giant threats, but there are some stuff even like uh, the whole proliferation of liquids taking derivatives, I believe, a couple of years ago, has made some change to the roadmap, and like the importance of solo staking and how to make solo staking more sort of easier and you give fairness like MEV fairness. I guess MEV so it's going to be a recurring topic in this system, like in this conversation. Like it seems like if you can get away with MEV by like encrypting the pools and whatnot, but ultimately it seems like too restrictive in that sense for an ecosystem to thrive. So uh, providing fairness for solo stakers in those type of sort of operational mechanics seems important, and I'm interested to see what development is going to come in the next few upgrades. Yeah, like the KCG commitments and like the math behind all of that is fascinating. And I think even in the video, what you mentioned that if you take the face value, then we have this KCG commitment with 140,000 contributors, I believe, for all the future improvements. But I'd like to know the math behind that. That'll be interesting. And yeah, I suppose we can do specific sessions for each of these specific blocks. I think the roadmap diagram itself makes good sense to me in terms of like the milestones and the color coded aspect of it. It was very interesting how Vitalik had laid that out. The last comment is like I'll just say that this, like looking at this roadmap, looking at all the work that has gone in, it's even surprising that any work gets done. But it's just seeing like all of the distractions in the crypto world with giant sort of attention-seeking events and parties and whatnot is kind of looks silly in the face of all the work still needs to be done and all the stuff to look forward to. And I don't think, in the roadmap linked, I think in all the articles linked, the roadmap discusses on the sort of social coordination challenges that comes with it. Like all of this only makes sense if these things are sufficiently decentralized. In other ecosystems, I don't see like similar levels of deep conversations going on the social coordination layer, which seems as important as the technical foundations layer for blockchains to make sense. Anyway, I'll stop there. I will pass it down to Venkat.
I am super pessimistic about my ability to understand any of this at technical level. Like even if you guys are excited and if you have the sort of like time and full-time money you want to dive in, like even if I had all the time and money in the world to do this, I wouldn't dive in because I think I don't think I'll get very far because this is like difficult stuff as far as I can tell, and it's not a kind of math that I have particularly strong intuitions for. So what I'm trying to do, I think, is almost get like a Fermi estimate type of sense of the boundaries of this technology trend, if you get what I mean. Like, what are the key points in what they're trying to do at almost like a managerial level, and how plausible is it that it'll happen, and what else is happening in the environment that's kind of like competition, I guess. So I'm kind of like in a very calibrated way, like depth limiting myself because I don't want to like go deep into what the hell a KZG proof is. Like I contributed to that thing. I'm one of the 140,000 people who went to the website and like moved my mouse around and clicked and got some sort of like cute little message, but I have no idea what the fuck I did. So I don't want to pretend that I either know what I did simply because I participated or that I can understand it. So, okay. All that said, I think maybe for others who are also at my level of depth limited intentions and like how to stay involved in this conversation, I think some of the interesting things to look for are what are people actually saying as the roadmap evolves, and that's usually a good clue to what's actually happening. The roadmap, of course, is like anything that has like a 10 to 20-year lifespan. It's basically somebody's like the whole idea of like what's that Eisenhower quote that plans are nothing, planning is everything. So I think it's important to make these 10 to 20-year plans. The process of going through that planning and thinking through the possible ways to solve the problems is important, but it's not important that you stick to a particular plan, right? Like even in the what's already happened in the scaling solution, the original idea they wanted was state channels. I remember like listening to some people chatting about state channels 3 years ago, and yeah, eventually they solved some other problems and ended up with the current solution, which is, sharding kind of works, so use roll-up centric L2, right? So that's, I think, the process of how these roadmaps are maintained. Like every year or two, Vitalik does an update to the roadmaps. Certain things get dropped. Other people do updates to the roadmap as well, like Justin Drake seems to have gotten really important in the conversation. So the roadmap is going to whiplash quite a bit. So I wouldn't like take any commitments that are not already EIPs scheduled in the next hard fork. I wouldn't take them super seriously because being on the sidelines of these conversations, I've seen lots of discussions drag on forever, and people think it'll happen in the next fork. It drags on for 3 forks, it doesn't happen, and then people route around it. Like EOF is an example. So that's the Ethereum object format for the EVM. So I think this is just calibrating expectations on how this kind of roadmap is actually managed in practice. So that's one thing. And you hear this if you listen in on some conversations, watch what happens on like Twitter and Farcaster, what people are actually fighting about on ACD. So that live process, I think, helps simplify understanding this really, really complicated idea and how it happens. The second thing that's worth looking at is live sort of infrastructure market signals. So the blob space market is a good example, right? It goes through like the way this process has been explained to me is like when you create this kind of new market capacity, initially it's not being filled up. Then eventually somebody figures out how to make good use of the market capacity, and then it gets overstressed and the price starts to move, right? And then there's another hard fork, the capacity increases, and the same dynamic goes up and down. So there's almost like a staircase evolution of the market's capacity to use new infrastructure that evolves in parallel with the capacity in improving itself. So think of it as like, how fast should you build more and wider roads? It has like a double helix relationship with how fast the vehicle industry is making new cars and trucks, right? And I think the blob space market is a good example of that. And right now, I think right after Pectra, people like Tim are going around and, trying to get more blob space users to like commit to using more. And part of some weird stuff is involved there too, like potential users of expanded blob space. Some of them have use cases that actually require more than the current hard fork gives. So they kind of like hold off, like waiting for capacity to increase even more. So there's like almost a chicken egg problem of building this kind of market. But I think here a very useful thought to keep in mind is like I think Vitalik commented sometime in Forecaster that he almost wants like every hard fork to increase blob capacity by 2x or 3x. And I think I replied with some sort of joke about is this like the Moore's law of Ethereum scaling? And I think I forget what he said, but yeah, it's basically a decent understanding of since the surge is the scaling part of the roadmap, it's good to think of it as a kind of Moore's law. And if you look at the history of Moore's law, from the consumer point of view, it almost looks like a natural law, like, the expansion of a gas or something. It just has an exponential curve. But you look at it from the inside of the semiconductor industry, every leap in the node has been in node sort of process physics and engineering has been the result of a lot of extremely complicated engineering that looks kind of like this, right? Like people come up with like 10 different clever technical tricks that together add up to the 2x leap that the next node offers. But it's not always the same technical tricks, and you can't in the next process leap, you can't just use like a bigger version of the same trick. You have to come up with new tricks, new physics, new engineering tricks. So in the back end of Moore's law, there's like a lot of extremely detailed, busy work. So I think something similar is happening here. So that's one factor I think that's interesting to keep in mind. Another is I think I like to keep an eye on what people are converging on as the big philosophical or technical philosophy shelling points. Like statelessness is, I think, a big lighthouse concept for Ethereum. And statelessness can be thought of as like you need to store as little as possible to keep transactions evolving in a valid way. And one way you trend towards that is move from increasing very deterministic ways of like keeping the state valid to very statistical ways of keeping the state valid, and then kind of like cryptographic proofs that don't scale at the same rate as the data being managed. So things like data availability sampling, for example, I see that as part of the trend towards statelessness. So the naive understanding I have, correct me if I'm wrong, is the simplest, dumbest way to keep a very long change of transactions valid is for everybody to simply remember all the transactions and like very laboriously check the history of transactions when a new transaction comes in, right? Like this is the dumbest possible way. You just backtrace the ledger all the way. The data availability sampling type stuff is like you kind of random sample stuff that's happening in a way that the people you're like auditing can't anticipate with the same computational effort. So that adds one level of security, which means at least the validator type people don't have to keep as much data around. They can like just randomly check stuff. And then further on, you have like the what is that? The prover verifier separation or prover builder or what is it? What is the
Builder
PDF?
separation.
Builder proposer separation. I keep getting that confused. Yeah, all that I think is towards keep less data online and move further towards statelessness. And I think statelessness has the flip side of yes, nobody on Ethereum wants to keep large amounts of data in a cryptographically secured way on chain. They want to like move as much of it offline, off chain, and keep the chain itself like almost the ideal state, I guess, would be a bunch of extremely short cryptographic proofs that are good enough for a while, and by the time history rolls on enough, by the time the data is like in somewhat ancient long-term memory, it's very reliable. So you don't necessarily want to like keep auditing like a million-year-old history, but by the time a history is like a certain number of blocks old, it's probably been QA'd enough that you can kind of like forget about it. So that's, I think, a lighthouse concept to keep in mind, the whole statelessness. Another lighthouse concept to keep in mind, and I think this is where the difference between Ethereum on the one hand and especially Solana and Cosmos on the other hand is important, because they're the main practical competition in terms of trying alternate things, which may turn out to be the right answer, right? And I think technically I would say Solana has probably already lost in terms of like this level of ambition of building a world computer. Like they've made like enough compromises to flatten all these problems into a single problem, and the cracks are already beginning to show. Like, yeah, they have like maybe higher volume and low transaction costs in periods, but then they've already crashed more often than I think Ethereum ever has. Like Ethereum has never gone down is a bragging point that I've heard several people repeat in recent talks, including like Josh Stark's talk at the last DevCon. So Ethereum has never gone down, whereas Solana has, I think, crashed in serious ways several times. Like in Ethereum, that has happened even the L2s haven't crashed as often as Solana has, as far as I know. So there's a deep robustness being built there. So in that sense, I would say Ethereum has already kind of like won the technical race against Solana, but it may not matter because the market has its own logic, right? Like it's won the technical race for censorship resistant scaling, but it could be that whatever market for this infrastructure exists simply doesn't care as much as we think it should about censorship resistance, in which case Solana will offer something like, this is a bit like the race between Microsoft and Linux for the server market. Like eventually, yes, Linux dominated, and we hope something similar will happen here where Ethereum is the technically better solution, and we hope it will dominate. But Solana is the Microsoft in the picture, and it's not going away. It'll I think, steady state out with a certain fraction of the market that simply doesn't care as much about CR, for example. Cosmos is something I've not read much about, but it keeps coming up in mentions. Even Vitalik sort of like mentions it a few times, like in admiring ways. Like they've apparently done some impressive alternate architecting, and my understanding is where Ethereum has like kind of a centralized lower layer stack that provides trust and security, and then a decentralized L2 level. And Solana flattens everything into one monolith. Cosmos, I think, is a horizontal scale out of like kind of like a deeper version of cross-chain architecture. So I don't quite understand it. Maybe we should read about Cosmos at some point, but that's another horse in the race. The last lighthouse idea I think I'll mention is I think a big market-facing debate in Ethereum in the last couple of years that people have not yet framed correctly is this an infrastructure technology or a retail technology? And I'm becoming increasingly convinced that this is a deep infrastructure technology. And what happened between 2017 and about 2020, which was, all the NFT booms, retail wallets, all that shit, it was like a huge red herring and kind of both a waste of time and technical resources, because I don't think the retail face of this technology will ever look like that. Like, like look at Farcaster's latest evolutions, which I think are the right things to do. The wallet is abstracted across Solana and Ethereum. It's kind of integrated with the app, and using the Farcaster wallet within Farcaster kind of feels like using regular credit cards or money. You don't have to worry too much about like, bridging. There's no bullshit wallet connect and stuff. You don't have to I think the whole dApps paradigm is basically gone. It's like the Toyota hybrid car kind of a stage of technology. It's going to be much more tightly integrated, where you don't have to like be very careful about having like a horizontal wallet across applications and then worry about if you're being asked to sign weird shit, things like that. It's much more vertically integrated, at least for the immediate future. But the effect of that is the retail face of this will start to look closer to like, Apple technology, where the first few layers are like so well designed, you have no idea what's going on way in the back end. So I think this is an important lighthouse idea, because it means all this stuff that's going on is like building out deep infrastructure technology without having to worry about, do the retail people understand it? Like, I mean, we don't understand how nuclear reactors work. We don't understand how aircraft engine works. We are retail users of a lot of shit that we simply don't understand even remotely, right? And I think that's where this is headed. Like, I mean, just look at this stuff. We are following this field for 3-4 years now, and several of us are like technically competent enough that we think we should be able to understand more than we actually end up understanding. And some of us have even been dabbling in this technology for years. If this was a retail technology, we would understand better than we do. So my suspicion is this will become more and more of a completely invisible infrastructure technology, and we'll understand it the way we understand other mature types of infrastructure, and the whole crypto world will evolve in like very different ways. Like, I'm kind of waiting for somebody important to basically make the case that stop wasting time on like retail surface area technologies for this, put this as deep in the backend as possible. So this doesn't mean you don't use things like NFTs, but it shouldn't feel like you're doing something very special. Like if you've used ZooPass, I think Anuraj and I are the only ones who have. But ZooPass is an alternate ZK-based wallet that's not on-chain at all, that uses like blobs of cryptographically secure data to create like trading card-like things that look like NFTs, and there's no on-chain component. This to me felt much more natural rather than like to give you an example of how annoying NFTs are. POAPs, which are like the proof of attendance protocol NFTs you get when you meet somebody in person, they're issued, I think, currently on the Gnosis chain. And then if you actually want it to show up on, say, your Farcaster profile, you have to bridge it over to Ethereum and then to Base. I don't think you can go directly from Gnosis chain to Base. But this is like asking a retail user to do something like change the diesel locomotive of a train on like a siding and then rebuild the train and go somewhere. It's stupid to ask retail users to do this. But the ZooPass version is kind of like easier. It's still not super easy, but it feels more retail. So there's a lot of that going on. So I think the retail layers will get designed in ways where it'll have cryptographic affordances, but people won't know or care that what chain it's built on, what bridging is, things like that. So that's a third lighthouse. So and I think the last lighthouse point is AI has not yet entered the building. Like it's very clear that ZKML and other things are going to be interesting and important. AI is currently like much bigger in terms of technical significance than crypto. The industry is, I would say, if you account for it right, I would say AI's net present value as a future trend is probably an order of magnitude bigger than crypto at this point, even though crypto has like a very large quote unquote market cap that nobody knows what it means. But this is a big sort of like, not a risk per se, but a blindside force that's coming at crypto, and how it gets absorbed into any of these roadmaps is going to be a huge deal, because I think that's actually going to shape the future more than many of these other things. Like I think quantum computing, like Ben, I think is not that important. I think I just asked ChatGPT, and worker trees, there's workarounds that could probably adapt to quantum computing. But AI is like a much bigger, more mature force that's coming at crypto much earlier. And we kind of have no idea what will happen when the two collide. But I'm hoping it'll be a very positive collision, right? You've got the MPC protocol for like data private ways of like connecting AI models. And presumably you can like shove some crypto in there. But yeah, that's the level at which I'm thinking. Like, watching. I think my strategy for tracking this conversation is listen and read, but don't attempt to understand too much. I think it's important to like learn to recognize all the terminology, so you at least have pointers to what people are even talking about. But then use the public conversation to pick up on what's happening in the real time with hard forks in terms of like usage and market responses and stuff. So that's a big one. Watch infrastructure and retail aspects get separated and have separate trajectories. Watch the competitors, and then watch what happens to AI. So that's kind of my, I don't know, somewhat structured managerial way of thinking about how to keep up with this. So I think that's it, and back to the room.
I did want to. Sorry, well,
No, I was just adding to what Venkat was saying about the retail versus infrastructure. So Ethereum feels, at least to me, it's like the vibe there is more infrastructure-y, but for Solana, the vibe, at least for me, it feels like more consumer-oriented or retail-oriented. So it might be also how each blockchain wants to position itself. Yeah, that was just a small comment. Yes, go on, Ben.
Actually, that's what I wanted to talk about as well, because so I like look at this complicated infrastructure track, and I know you can go deep dive on anything, but just looking at this, thinking about it for the half hour, I've been thinking pulling back a bit, I mean, the whole point is that ETH is supposed to scale to like, I don't know, 8 billion people, or if population decline, so it's 7 billion people, 5 to 7, and like, if that's supposed to happen, if it's supposed to be like really everywhere, then it's gonna have to be retailed. I mean, you could imagine, all right, so there'll be a bunch of businesses, all of which will wrap around ETH, but you'll never see ETH. But somehow it'll still scale over the entire world. I don't feel like that's stable, especially since, I mean, so why would you use? And so there's also no discussion of like the ETH asset, the actual coin. If people are going to want to value that, then they're going to have to interface with it, which means that they're going to have to touch it, which means that it can't just all vanish into the background, I don't think. So I think the way this roadmap is set up is that the idea is it is fundamentally going to have to be involved people, not businesses at some point. It's not to say that there isn't room for having businesses or whatever. But yeah, it just, so I feel like that part you're going to have to get people are going to have to care, at least at a very high level, because remember, all this stuff is open source. It would be entirely possible, like technically, if you had the hard part's the huge amount of team and people who care. But if it's just business to business, then the number of people who care will always be small compared to all the people you're serving, and will also always be sort of hidden. And maybe Ethereum R is already somewhat like that. It doesn't have as many popular faces in the dev team as like some other chains used to. And the risk of, I think, business to business is almost falling into like the whole Bitcoin has slowly been sucked into, where it's not a peer-to-peer currency. It's a EFT to EFT Wall Street trade. And the downside of that is that, like, if that's what it becomes, there's sort of no point to any of this. Like, it's just a ticker and on like the EFT on and then NY Stock Exchange. At which point, the technical layer might not exist at all. You could just say, we create 21 million of these shares and everyone have fun. So if the technical layer exists and is meaningful, which is to say all this stuff and the roadmap is meaningful, which I do think it is, then I think it can't just all vanish into the ether and just be in the background. People people are going to have to interface with it. Maybe, I mean, I think there's a line going around about Vitalik talking about dev UX versus user UX. And I feel like, that's obviously the wrong question. You want as much UX as you can get. It's just a matter of, getting people to actually do it. It's very difficult. Yeah, I think that's my thought. We're pretty much out of time. If anyone wants to respond.
Yeah, I do want to respond to that. Vanishing does not mean they don't touch it, right? Like, we all fly in planes or ride on trains or drive our cars. Doesn't mean we understand much or anything about what's going on inside. Like, I just rode a Waymo for the first time when I went to SF last week. I have like, I don't know, small appreciation of like maybe 5% of what's going on. But otherwise, I'm just sitting there and being very dumb. So being able to use a technology or having an interface to it doesn't mean you have to like understand it with any level of literacy. So maybe that's the better way to rephrase it. It's like, I think the literacy level required to use Ethereum has to go to the level that I'm calling basically invisibility, right? Like at the moment, I would say if, for example, air travel involved the same level of like literacy that Ethereum currently seems to be targeting, then you would have, it would be the equivalent of, I don't know, everybody having at least a small pilot's license in order to take a flight. That's not the case. It's the standard is much lower. The literacy level you need to fly in commercial air today is you just have to be able to I don't know, get your boarding pass from an app, go to the airport, know how to get through security, and then, I don't know, walk down the jetway. That literacy level is like 5% more complex than walking down the road on a pavement, right? So that's what I'm getting at. So it can't be that you have to learn to fly a small private plane in order to use this stuff. It has to get to the level of, and I think the stablecoin trend is kind of getting there, though there are much. We should talk about stablecoins at one point, but stablecoins are an example, right? Like stablecoins already cut out like a huge amount of one kind of complexity, which is you don't have to deal with price variations and the associated like both um, investment grade thinking and complicated tax planning, right? Even if there were zero taxes, it would be annoying to have to do retail level spending decisions with an asset that goes up and down so much. So stablecoins are kind of solving that problem. But the key point that the stablecoin sort of like evangelists like Base aren't yet thinking through properly is um, this is fundamentally a market in priced infrastructure, and you can't actually price it in stable coins. I mean, there's a reason each prices go up and down, which is that it is the cost of security, and the cost of security changes as security salient things happen or don't, right? So fundamentally, the price of ETH as an asset to ensure trust and security will go up and down based on the cost of provisioning trust and security. But 90% of us, 99% of us shouldn't have to deal with it. Just like, 99% of us don't carry guns and badges and aren't cops who are dealing with the varying cost of like providing urban security, right? So that's what I mean here, that the literacy level has to be very low.
Yeah, I think we agree with each other. It's just one thing, and I didn't want to, and maybe in this we're already over time. Is I feel like all this stuff that we talked about today, it's all in a committee, and it's not necessarily bad. But I think there's also Ethereum tends to lack a unified vision, and maybe that's not necessary. But I feel like if you're going to try to take over the world, you need something that's simpler than making a rhyme about urge. Um, and I don't think they've ever really been able to grab that. I think it's been too much of a committee at the top where no one is like saying like, all right, this is my vision, let's do it. Um, Even though I think Vitalik does sort of play that role, he's nervous about it in ways that I think are reasonable, but also not quite fitting. Anyway, I don't want to keep blabbering.
More thoughts? If not, then we could read the Scourge section for in 2 weeks. I think it has MEVs and stake capping and other stuff. So I think that should be good enough for one session. So we can read that next time in 2 weeks. Thank you. See you in 2 weeks.